So we need to understand the amount of protein that cow's going to need and deliver pretty close to it.
Dr. Kelly Newhold returns as our guest as we discuss why you would consider adding crude protein to your cow's diet, from maintaining a healthy body condition score to calving to getting the most out of your low-cost feed sources.
Protein supplementation has been proven to impact all of those things.
We'll also discuss one of the most commonly used protein sources, urea, why it's used, and some of the misconceptions about urea. Plus, we'll also talk about other high-protein options that can be used, and the answer to this.
One of the cheapest things that we can do that get us the furthest on our nutritional program is...
Now, if you think this is a show about adding more cost to your feed bill, you're wrong. So tune in and find out on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you to another edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Thanks for tuning in and joining us here on today's program. Now, if this is your first time listening to the Working Ranch Radio Show, we welcome you and hope you enjoy the program here today. By the way, if you want to go back and listen to any other shows that we've had, you can find our library of shows by going to our podcast site at workingranchradio.com. You can find all those shows, or if you have your own preferred podcast provider like Spotify or Pandora or who knows, there's a lot of them out there. You can find it on those platforms as well. Now, speaking of previous shows, last week I'd encourage you to go back and listen to episode 186, Dr. Stephanie Hansen, Iowa State University professor, talking to us about the benefits of zinc supplementation prior to and after transportation. And this time of the year, we put wheels under a lot of cattle, and whether you're on the receiving end or the shipping end, there's some benefits to a high zinc diet. Go back and listen to last week's show amongst a lot of other shows. And one of the things you'll find out, again, talking to those of you that might be first-time listeners to the program, a lot of the shows that we do here are not necessarily time sensitive. Occasionally we do those, but a lot of the time they're subjects that at any point in time you can listen to them, and hopefully you find some value in that show on subjects that are relevant to you and I as ranchers. Now, speaking of old shows or even this week's show, if you like what you hear, leave us a comment, leave us a rating. That's always helpful, not only to us, but also to other folks that are reviewing and looking at the show, because if they see some comments or some ratings on a particular episode that we had here, maybe they'll go and listen to it and find some value, that's some information that is useful to them. Now, coming up later on in the program, as we always do, the Captain Tim O'Byrne, editor of Working Ranch Magazine, will be in for this week's edition of Tim's Two Cents, and we'll hear from meteorologist Don Day with a look at that long-term weather forecast, and it's a weather forecast that for a lot of us, we have really been wanting. It's been hot and dry for the last 30 days. Shoot, for others, it's been hot and dry all summer long, and starting to see things cool down and some moisture across the country. Tune in later on in the program. We'll hear from meteorologist Don Day and what he is thinking it's going to look like for the next 10 to 15 days for our weather across the country. Well, before we jump into our interview, it's a good time to check the coffee cup and make sure it's filled up, thanks to the folks at Cowpuncher Coffee. I've got mine ready to go right in front of me, and encourage you, go check out their website. In fact, this time of the year, you always hear pumpkin spice is kind of the big thing. Well, they've got some pumpkin spice options on their website, whether you want it in a K-cup or whether you want it ground or whole bean. There's ways you can get that through Cowpuncher Coffee. Of course, they also have a variety of other different blends. Again, whole bean or ground, however you'd like it. Their craft coffee is done in small batch, hand-roasted package in 1-pound bags, all made there in the state of Texas. So check it out. Cowpunchercoffee.com is where you can find out more. Give Jim or Trish Williams, or if you really want to get things done, get Miss Olivia. They're kid in charge. Let them know what you need, and they'll get you set up there at cowpunchercoffee.com. Well, turning to our subject at hand, Dr. Kelly Newhold with Westway Feed Products is our guest here today. Now, if you recall, and regular listener, his name might sound familiar. Well, it is, should be, because he was with us back on episode 177, where we covered the topic on TMR mixers. It was entitled Things to Consider on Using TMR Mixers from Rookie to Expert. Now, you might have a TMR mixer or considering getting one. This is a show I'd encourage you to go back and listen to. But Dr. Newhold, we appreciate you being back here again on today's program.
Thanks. Glad to be here, Justin.
Well, Kelly, before we jump into today's subject on protein supplementation, I want to go back and address one thing from last week's show. And it was something that I got kind of wrong. And we talked about it. You and I talked about it this week. Now, my show last week, as I said earlier today, was with Dr. Stephanie Hansen, who is with Iowa State University, as she shared with us the results out of the research and the studies they're doing on a high zinc diet in livestock. I encourage you again to go back and listen to that. But it was not anything she said. It was actually something that I kind of did on my own as I was trying to figure out, I'm doing my own math of how much we're getting in terms of zinc from a mineral that we might just pull off the shelf or go into the feed store and buy if you're not getting a custom blend done, or even if you are custom getting and they're just meeting the NRC requirements, it's going to be probably around that 3,600 parts per million is what you're going to see. And in the math that I had done, I didn't quite get it nailed down as far as what that means. So Kelly, if you could kind of correct where I went wrong last week on figuring out on a bag of mineral that says it has 3,600 parts per million of zinc in it, just how much is that cow consuming?
Yeah, Justin. So we've got to remember that ppm is a concentration, like it's a percentage of the nutrient in that product, right? So when you say you have 3,600 ppm, you're saying 3,600 parts per million, or that's the concentration of zinc in that product. And really, our animals eat to an amount, right? So the NRC would say that a beef cow would need around that 400 milligrams per head per day. And so when you did the math, you got it to milligrams per pound, which would have been about 15, I believe, milligrams per pound from that product of dry matter for the cow would be the concentration in her diet. And we did need to convert that back to ppm, which is what the NRC would say. So that was parts per million. So that your product was like 30 to 34 parts per million zinc in the cow's final dry matter, which would deliver about 400 milligrams per head per day to those cows if they ate that quarter pound of supplement.
Which, according to the NRC requirements, that 3,600 usually kind of targets what those requirements are. But again, as Dr. Hansen was telling us last week, up in that to around that 100 ppms is where the mark on a high zinc diet would be.
You're right. So that product you have was formulated for the current NRC, and her research would suggest that it needs to be higher than that, obviously. But what your product is formulated to the current NRC. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yep. That makes sense. Well, Kelly, let's jump back to our subject that we're here to talk about today, and that is the use of protein supplements in the diets of our livestock. Now, keep in mind, folks, this is not the idea. I'm not coming at this with an approach of how do we add more input cost to our program and our ranching operation. It's not about that. It's really about how do we be efficient with what we've got, utilize the feed sources that we have to get the most out of the cattle, and really at the end of the day to be profitable when we do that. So, Dr. Newhold, when we look at where a lot of us are at a point now to where we've weaned calves, or getting ready to wean calves, we pulled these calves off, are going to be, and getting this cow pulled back together for the coming months is pretty important.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of these areas that have drought conditions, me in Southeast Colorado, I've already weaned my calves because my grass is short and my cows are a little thin, and a lot of us right now, they're not milking a calf. We want to just kind of set them and forget them, let them go out and fend for themselves. But if they're in a little low body condition score, now's a great time to pick up a little body condition score. And we have to remember too, that grass, depending on what they're grazing, that forage base may be losing quite a bit of its quality right now. So supplementing with a little crude protein may be able to gain us some body condition score, or help us to maintain a little body condition score and set us up to have a really good spring and summer next year.
As you and I were talking before we met here today, you'd said something to me that really was intriguing in regards to body condition scores. We all know that if a cow gets too far down, it really takes a lot of feed and money to get her pulled back together versus maintenance, which over the long run is cheaper. And there was kind of that optimal point in time. Explain what you were telling me on that.
Yeah, so there's some good research. It was out of University of Oklahoma that said, those thin cows that are a 4 body condition score or lower have a pretty low maintenance energy requirement because they're thin and their body's trying to conserve energy. And so they've kind of shut down some of those extras. They don't have a real high maintenance requirement. Then when we get them into that body condition score 5, that that maintenance requirement actually increases, right? But once we get them into the body condition score 6, we actually see that maintenance energy requirement start to come down. So it's cheaper to feed those cows if we can maintain them in that body condition score 6 and keep them in a good body condition score, as opposed to letting them get back down to a lower body condition score. Part of it is, those cows have a thicker fat layer, so they're going to have a little more insulation during the winter and that kind of thing. But those cows are cheaper to maintain if we can maintain them in that 5.5 to 6 body condition score, as opposed to keeping them in that 4.5 to 5 body condition score. So we can save some groceries and maybe make those cows go a little further. And we know we're going to have better calving. We're going to have better colostrum production. The calves are going to be healthier out of cows that are in that 5 and 6 body condition score than cows that are lower, right?
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that back fat, because I feel like coming out of summer, of course, these cows are going to have usually have sort of set that just a little bit. But as you had mentioned, and you're not the only one, there's other guys all across the country, myself included, that kind of a dry year. And we're going into this fall and in this winter with maybe not as much fat on these cows as that we've had. But at the same time, as we talked about, we get these calves off these cows. We use some protein to try to maintain, and I guess I feel you could put some back fat back on these cows in this cooler time of this year and where this weather's turning.
You're exactly right, Justin. If we use strategic protein supplementation, we know we can increase the hyperdigestibility of those lower quality forages. We've seen the research would suggest somewhere between a 10 to 15% improvement in fiber digestion. And so those cows are going to be able to get more out of what they're eating and probably eat a little more. We're talking a pound or 2 per head per day. And so they're getting more out of it, and they're going to put more into their gut. So their energy requirement is lower because they're not lactating right now. The fetus isn't in the 3rd trimester or the end of the 3rd trimester. So that requirement's fairly low. So we can improve the energy we're getting into those cows by putting a little protein supplement out there. They're going to get more out of the grass they're eating, and we can certainly gain a body condition score or 2 fairly easily this time of year.
Mm-hmm. While we're on this subject of back fat, I want to talk real quickly. We're going to move to the calving time of the year, or later in the year for this cow. And you and I were talking a little bit about this, because I had mentioned to you that the fact that we do expect a drawdown on those cows a little bit. Of course, I don't calve till May and June, so my drawdown is a little later than somebody calving in February or March, which you really can't afford to have too much of a drawdown at that point in the winter.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We know that cows that aren't getting adequate protein supplement prior to calving, they're going to have weaker calves. They're going to have more dystocia issues. They're going to produce less colostrum. That colostrum is going to be poor quality, and those calves aren't going to have quite the immune response as the cows that had appropriate protein supplementation prior to calving. And the same thing after calving too, right? For those guys that are calving in December through March, and they're not hitting that green grass when they're calving, that's still a crucial time too, because inadequate protein supplementation post-calving can reduce our breedback rate. I think some of the research would say, cows that got adequate protein post-calving had a 90% breed up rate versus a 70% of cows that didn't get an adequate protein after calving. So we really need to be strategic about it, not only managing those body conditions scores, but making sure we've got the appropriate nutrients to those cows when they need it, right? Because it's not only going to affect that calving season, but it's going to affect the calving seasons to come, and whether those cows breed back, and then whether those calves get scours or not. And if they do get scours, whether they recover or whether we lose them, right? Mm-hmm. So protein supplementation has been proven to impact all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Newhall, let's take a break here. And folks, when we come back, we've still got a lot to talk about with Kelly here on this, because we're going to get into things like, what are the protein requirements that we need to be looking at for these cows? Also, when to feed protein, especially in the time of the year where there maybe those cows are out on pasture. and looking at ways you can be strategic in your labor savings and also, just cost savings in general. So we've got a lot more to talk about. We'll be back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment brought to you today by Zoetis. Back your instincts and feel more confident in your replacement selection this fall with Inherit Select from Zoetis. Visit beefgenetics.com/Working Ranch to get started.
Build a better herd with genomic EPDs for your commercial females. A cattleman is only as good as his tools. So add Inherit Select from Zoetis to your shoot side lineup to back your intuition and to help reveal the replacements with the potential to be the most productive and profitable in your herd. Keep the best. Sell the rest. Zoetis makes it easy. Order free supplies today so you can easily collect tissue samples when you work cattle this fall. Visit beefgenetics.com/Working Ranch to get started.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest is Dr. Kelly Newhold, a nutritionalist with Westway Feed Products. And our subject today is looking at adding in crude protein into the diet of your animals as we are post-weaning, then looking ahead into pre-calving and post-calving and pre-breeding, of course. But looking at the benefits that we can see from doing that, and not as a means of adding more expenses to your bottom line. It's not the point as much as it is maybe that's a way that you can improve the quality or the usefulness of the forage that is before them. Maybe they're on grass, maybe they're on some poorer quality hay. In either way, we can improve that and get those cattle to respond better and actually get through the winter months and pre and post calving and then breed up, of course, and we have that cycle that goes on. Dr. Newhold, as we get into the next thing, you and I were discussing a little bit as well about when to feed. I think traditionally years ago, it was pretty common that every day you started up the tractor and you went out, or your pickup, and you went out and fed cows every day. But what we're finding in some studies that have been done, that doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So explain what you have found, what you're hearing out there, and in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Justin, that, in past, we felt like we needed to see the cows every day and put some feed in front of them. But I think the universities have done a great job of exploring this question, do I need to feed protein supplement every day to my cows? And the research has looked at feeding every day versus all the way to feeding only once a week. And I think all of them are appropriate. All of them, feeding supplement is better than not feeding supplement, whether you're doing it once a week or whether you're doing it every day, right? Mm-hmm. Ideal, we know those rumen microorganisms have a very short shelf life. And so if we can feed them more often, every day is a little better. But if we can save gas and money and labor and all that stuff, the research has shown there's not a whole lot of benefit feeding once a day versus feeding 2 or 3 times a week, and so we can save some money that way. A cow does what they call urea recycling, right? So any excess nitrogen that cow has in her body, her liver converts it to urea, and then either through the rumen wall or through saliva, she puts it back into that rumen when she's in a low nitrogen diet, and will feed those rumen microorganisms that urea to continue to give those rumen microorganisms what they need, and then they convert into microbial protein and feed the cow, right? So it's what makes cows awesome, right? Is that ability to be able to conserve that nitrogen and keep it going. And so we can use that to our advantage by only feeding her every other day or every third day. And so it's pretty awesome. And if we can save quite a little bit of money and not see a reduction in performance or reduction in body condition score by being able to feed her those schedules that help us out.
Yeah. Well, and I've always looked at it this way. A lot of times we as humans like to put things in our perspective, like, okay, I've got to eat every 4 or 5 hours. Well, a cow is a ruminant. They're different. And we don't look at it from that perspective and realizing that let's use how God made them and let's feed them accordingly.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think that gets me to another point I'd like to bring up is I talked about urea recycling. Urea is a natural compound that comes up in those animals. I don't know if you've seen your blood work and seen your bun number, blood urea nitrogen is what BUN stands for, right? And so urea is a compound that we make it synthetically. That's the stuff people know about putting on their fields and that kind of stuff. And that's what we would put in feed is synthetic urea, but it's indistinguishable from the urea that's already in that animal's body, right? And so we can take that those cows use urea and feed their rumen microorganisms, and we can use that too, right, in the feed and be able to feed urea. And it's a very safe source. Now you want to be smart about it. There is such a thing as urea toxicity, but urea fed in the modern feed system in an appropriate manner can be a great source. And, a lot of people shy away from those higher crude protein products, whether it be cake or liquid or tubs that are 35%, because they want an all natural. But those all natural products are typically our more expensive crude protein. And what it means by all natural is those are what I would call a true protein, an amino acid source, as opposed to an NPN source or a non-protein nitrogen source. But urea is safe. It's in the animal. The animal is going to feed itself urea, whether we feed it or not. So we might as well use the cheapest, most effective source of protein. And a lot of times that is urea.
As you mentioned that we've created a synthetic urea product out there that we put on fields or in the feed products that we see today. The question would be is what are you finding in regards to that product, though that ingredient being used in feed supplements for those cattle that are trying to fit into the programs of, say, like an all natural type program?
A lot of people, they think they're selling their calves in a natural program, and so they can't use urea or don't want to use urea. But I've only run across one program in my career, which is 15 years now, that disallowed urea. So you really need to know your program. But if you're just trying to be an all natural kind of guy, there's nothing wrong with feeding urea in most supplements. And so it's a great way. We do kind of want to avoid, especially if you're in a program, you want to avoid some of those feather meals and some of those animal proteins and that kind of stuff. You want to understand what your program is you're doing, but for the most part, urea is cleared on those programs.
So Dr. Newhold, as we're coming to this point, there's kind of two directions I want to go in. In the next segment, I want us to visit about some other types of high protein products or ingredients that could be used as in our feed sources. But before that, as we finish out this segment, I want us to talk a little bit about, similarly to a subject I had, it was almost, I think, a year ago when I had Dr. Mark Johnson on from Oklahoma State University. The title of that show is episode 142 was Cost-Effective Feeding Using Some Basic Cowboy Math. And really what it got down to was looking at the cost per protein and knowing, what that cow needed based upon what that product could give, and really determining that is a step that needs to be part of this process.
Yeah. So first, like you said, you have to understand what's my cow's requirement. If we look at the NRC numbers, which would be the government puts together a group of scientists and they come up with the research and kind of say what they think the standard should be. If we look at that, a non-lactating cow in the second trimester would be about 6% crude protein would be a requirement. So if she's a 1,300 pound cow, she'd eat about 26 pounds of dry matter. That means she's going to need about 1.6 pounds of crude protein, right? That same cow, when she moves into her third trimester, her protein requirement jumps up to 8%. And now she's going to need about a little over 2 pounds of crude protein per head per day, right? And then once she's calved and we're in that first 90 days of calving, she's going to be 10.2% crude protein or a little over 2.5 pounds of crude protein. So we need to understand the amount of protein that cow's going to need and deliver pretty close to it.
And I think it's easy. I'm guilty of it myself, of being enticed by a lower price point on a product and not looking at the overall effectiveness of what it's going to bring to the animal. I've been guilty of it, and I think that's something that happens quite often.
No, you're exactly right. That's why typically if we're looking at it on a protein basis, those higher percent crude protein products are typically our cheaper protein sources, right? If we're talking about a 20% cake versus a 32% cake, the 32 price per ton is going to be higher, but what really matters is our price per head per day. And it's going to be cheaper to feed that 32 because we're going to have to feed less of it than we're going to have to feed of that 20%. Right. Mm-hmm. So yeah, typically, whether it's a liquid, whether it's a cake, whether it's a forage like alfalfa or something, the higher protein product is going to be our cheaper protein supplement as opposed to the lower protein.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Well, let's take another break here. When we come back, as I said, I want to talk about some other types of high protein ingredients that can be used and some of the conversation regarding that when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment today brought to you by Barn Owl. It's what we use here on the X-Ring Ranch to watch our stock tanks, our hay yard, our cow camp corrals, just those remote areas that you just want real-time awareness. And it starts right with Barn Owl. It's about peace of mind. Build your off-grid camera system today at barnowl.tech. Are you tired of putting the wear and tear on your ranch pickup or your good side-by-side out checking stock tanks or reservoirs? Or maybe it's just keeping an eye on a remote ranch location. When you stop and you think about it and you start to calculate the cost of your time, fuel, and miles on your vehicles, you're going to scare yourself. But there really is a very simple and a reassuring solution, and it's called Barn Owl. Barn Owl off-grid cameras and smart alerts provide you that assurance, and there's no question it is a time and a money saver. From anywhere at any time, no Wi-Fi or power needed. Build your off-grid camera system today at barnowl.tech. Real-time awareness starts here. Always know with Barn Owl. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Dr. Kelly Newhold is my guest today, and we have been talking just about the use of added protein into the diet of your animals. And as we look into this segment specifically at some different types, we had previously talked about urea and what it can do, and just typically in general what a high protein, added protein into the diet of animals can do. Now, when we look at other types of high protein products that are out there, first question I have, Dr. Newhold, would be a product that's called Biuret. And as I've been told, it's more of a slow release type of protein. Explain what that is, how it works.
Yeah, so Biuret is you're exactly right. It's a slow release urea. It's a couple urea molecules bound together. And so those rumen microorganisms have to kind of break that apart to convert it to ammonia in the rumen and then use it for microbial protein. And so it's really a safe, slow release. If you're going to get up, Biuret's used a lot when we're talking about like our 45% or 55% crude protein products. They're going to use that as kind of a safer way to use an NPN or a non-protein nitrogen that'll act more like a true protein and release a little slower in the rumen than if we just used urea.
Okay. Let's talk about some other protein type products. As we're talking about urea in general, as you have talked about, a lot of times that is in a product. It is the source of the protein in a product, whether you're buying it through a block or whether it's in a liquid or various forms that it could show up in. But there are specific products that would be considered high protein that you can, so let's say you're mixing. Of course, you were on the show with us before when we were talking about TMR mixers, and you well know that the guys that are mixing their own feed on the ranch for whatever that may be, you might have some different products you can throw in that mixer as your protein source. So let's talk about what some of those are.
Yeah, there are lots of feed ingredients that are going to be what I would call protein feeds, right? So they're going to be high in protein. They're going to be great for natural sources of protein. Typically, like you said, our urea is going to be boost our protein level in a supplement, whether it be a dry supplement or a block or a liquid or cake. But distillers grains are a great commodity that we talk about. And there's a lot of research out there, people feeding distillers grains out on the ground or in feed bunks, as the protein supplement. They're going to be right in that 29% crude protein. So it's going to be a pretty high. The majority of it is going to be a natural protein. It's mostly protein of corn, right? Those distillers grains are going to come from ethanol production, and they're going to remove the starch and leave the protein and the other things. And so those distiller grains are going to be a great source of protein for the cattle. Down in my neck of the woods, we feed whole cottonseed, or we could feed cottonseed meal. Those are great sources. I think they keep talking about we're going to start crushing a ton of soybeans. And so soybean meal is going to become a hot commodity here soon, hopefully. And so that'll be another great source to look to be able to supplement these cows and give some different nitrogen sources for the cows. Alfalfa hay is what I grew up in the Arkansas Valley feeding cows there, and so we used a lot of alfalfa hay. The important thing about alfalfa hay and that kind of stuff is we want to test it and see what the actual protein level is. It can range anywhere from 14% up to 25 to 27% crude protein if you're talking some really hot stuff. So, yeah, there's lots of great feed. So we need to know too what the crude protein level of our base forage is, right? Is it dry grass? Are we grazing crop aftermath, corn stalks, wheat straw, barley straw, that kind of stuff? What's the base protein level of that? If we're talking wheat straw and corn stalks, it may be 3 to 4%. If we're grazing native range in your neck of the woods, it may be 6.5 to 7%, which would be pretty close to what she needs. And we don't need to supplement a whole bunch to get her where she needs to be, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, you kind of took my next question that I was going to ask you is just looking at, we really do need to get that baseline of what we're, whatever that base feed is. In fact, on my whiteboard here, I've got it, and I need to get out and do it, is get all the hay that I've got in, the different types of hay that I've got in, get it tested. It's super simple, and the information you get from there is going to be very valuable.
One of the cheapest things that we can do that get us the furthest on our nutritional program is test our forages, right? Know what they are. Because if we don't, we're shooting in the dark with our supplement, right? Then we're just going to just supplement whatever we feel like it as opposed to what they need. And so a ton of the extension people will come help you sample them. Sample about 10% of your bales. If you've got alfalfa bales and grass bales, sample them separately and know what you got and what you're feeding. And then we can get strategic about, when the cows get closer to calving, we're going to supplement with this hay. And once they're calved, then we're going to bring out the best alfalfa hay and give them what they need to get them to green grass or whatever it is, right? Yeah. But if we don't know what those hays are, we're just shooting in the dark.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, Kelly, let's take a break here. And when we come back, as we wrap up our conversation in this next segment, a couple more points I want to hit. One of them specifically talking about my concern of overfeeding that we see in the industry versus underfeeding. Now, underfeeding has its issues that we talked about, but overfeeding can also. We want to talk about that when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment today brought to you by the American Gelbvieh Association. Meet modern industry demands for feedlots and carcass traits with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics. Find out more at gelbvieh.org.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Dr. Kelly Newhold with Westway Feed Products. And Kelly, in that last segment, we were talking about testing our feed so that we know whether it's our grass, if they're on grass, or leftover crops that are in the field, to hay and various things like that that you're going to be using as your base on there. And one of the things is break we were talking about, and of course I'm kind of more on the low input operations mindset of things, because I feel like we can always put a lot of stuff into these cows and then maybe have big old honking calves, but at the same time the net bottom dollar at the end of the day wasn't there than anybody that just was real strategic about what they did. And I think one of the concerns that I think people need to understand is overfeeding can be as detrimental, different type of detrimental issues, but it could be definitely costly to your operation, and in addition to breed back. But overfeeding can be as bad as underfeeding. So really, it's about dialing in.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Justin. The overfeeding is just wasting our money, right? We're just, that cow's peeing it out or pooping it out or laying in it, and we're not putting any more into that calf. And so So the bottom line of that ranch, overfeeding is just as detrimental as underfeeding, right? So I see much more underfeeding than I do overfeeding. But like you said, if we sample our forages, if we get our hays, we can dial it in and we can save ourselves a lot of money. The biggest expense on a ranch is feeding those cows and maintaining those cows. So if we know what we've got and we know how to use it, we can save a lot of money. You know, a feed sample, if you go out and sample 10% of your bales, put it in one sample and send it to one of these commercial labs, it's going to cost you $25. Mm-hmm. You know, strategically feeding that forage, you can save a lot more than $25. It's pretty cheap insurance and pretty cheap information to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's going to be kind of a plug for you and your profession, and that you are a nutritionist. And I think I know there's guys, if you've been feeding cattle a lot of years, maybe you kind of know some of this stuff, but at any point, it's something I've always done is give a call to your nutritionist. I go through them. Here's the types of cattle I'm going to be feeding, whether it's background and calves, or maybe it's, some bred heifers, some young cows, older cows, your running age cows, whatever that may be, and go through the different hay types or feed types that you're going to be using, what's available, what's the proteins out there that we can be looking at. I think having that conversation initially with a nutritionist is very important. And then you can look at maybe some, if you're wanting to tweak on that a little bit, there's some resources out there, whether it's computer spreadsheets that can help you with putting a ration together, in addition to also, I think, understanding, what are your daily costs and are you meeting those requirements with what you're feeding?
Yeah. And there are, whether it's your feed company, whether it's your extension agent, whether, like you said, just go on the internet and find the cow calculator, there's a lot of ways to skin that cat. And you can add a lot of money to your bottom line, and that's really what it's about, right? It is a lifestyle, but we got to be able to afford to live this lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. As we kind of close out our conversation here today, a lot of this is about keeping this cow in a position to where we're maximizing her ability to bring a net return on your operation. So we're looking down the road. We're putting this cow back in good condition, because here for some folks, maybe it's 3 months. For others, maybe it's 6 months down the road. We're starting this up again, and she's got another calf at side. And so pre-calf, post-calf, it's really what we're targeting is that time frame.
Yeah, it's not just about this cow right now. It's about this cow and her calves to come. One thing I like to tell producers, I know it because I've experienced it, right? We can't starve a profit out of these cows, right? There's just no way to starve a profit out of these cows. I know a lot of producers get leery about, especially feeding protein to heifers. They think it's going to increase their dystocia and the size of the calf, but it's really not. Adequately feeding these cows, the calf's only going to grow as good as those genetics are, and if we try to starve some of those genetics out of them, we're going to increase our dystocia. We're going to reduce the cow's ability to milk. We're going to reduce our colostrum quality, and we're going to add problems down the road that we're going to have to pay for later. So let's just make sure we get those cows in good body condition score, maintain them in good body condition score, and they're going to really work for us, I think.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, as we talk about this and you say, you gave an example of a 1,300-pound cow earlier and what she needed for dry matter intake and crude protein intake. I think it's important for us to understand, too, we need to know the weight on our cows. And there's a lot of guys that want to estimate, and I can tell you they're going to be 100 to 150 pounds lighter than what they think they have or more. And getting a good weight every year on your cows. And I'm not getting paid by any True Test or whoever else you got out there that runs scale company, but weighing your cows and knowing what they weigh, that's part of dialing in.
Oh, you're absolutely right, because that 1,300-pound cow is probably an underestimation, like you talked about, right? And if you look at some of that mark data where they look at the breeds and stuff, and they say the Angus breed now is one of the largest cows out on our range, mm-hmm. We really need to make sure we understand what the size of our cow is so we can supplement her appropriately. If we know what our forages are, but we don't know how big our cow is, we're going to miss the mark because we're underestimating that. So you're exactly right, Justin.
As well, when it comes to feeding, as you talked about overfeeding or underfeeding, if you're somebody that has a tendency to overfeed, a cow's going to eat. If you put a cow in there on a round bale feeder, she will eat way more than she absolutely needs to.
She will eat you out of house and home. Yep.
She's worse than a horse.
Yep. They're bigger hay burners than horses for sure. Yep.
Well, Kelly, some good discussion here today. Before we leave, I know we kind of summed up the end game. What we're looking at this is that next, that getting that cow ready for pre-calving, for post-calving, for breed up. And I mean, it's a cyclical pattern in this, as we all know. Just some final comments from you regarding this protein, the importance of it in these cows' diet, and not to be so consumed with the fact of understanding that there is a cost to that, but it's about getting this cow to be efficient with what she's got in front of her.
Yeah. I think protein supplementation is probably one of the best tools that we have to get the most out of that cow and to get her ready for the next year. And I think understanding body condition and what the actual body condition of your cows is, invite a neighbor, invite one of your feed guys to come out and body condition score your cows with you, so you know what they really are. So you know what size they are, you know what shape they're in, and you know what your feed are, and we can make these herds pretty successful.
You bet. Well, I appreciate you joining us here today. Some good insight today on our subject here, and hope to catch you up down the road again as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Look forward to it.
You bet. And Dr. Kelly Newhold with Westway Feeds joining us here on our program today as we look at this topic of added protein into the diet of your animals, really doing it on a very strategic basis. We keep using that word over and over, but I think that's the point in this, and that not overdoing it, definitely not underdoing it, but doing it in a means that brings profitability and efficient production to your own operation. By the way, also I'd mentioned the fact that to get a hold of your nutritionist as you're starting with some of this. If you have any questions, you can sure get a hold of any of the folks at Westway Feeds as well. Their website, should you want to get a hold of them, you can go to it at westwayfeed.com. Stay with us. Coming up after the break, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and we'll hear from meteorologist Don Day with a look at that long-term weather.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. Justin, about 6 episodes back, you did one on the bird flu of the California dairies. Folks, go back and listen to that. There's a lot of good information packed into that episode. This is kind of a follow-up here. An article by Suzanne Rust of the LA Times. As a rapidly increasing number of California dairy farms suffer outbreaks of H5N1 bird flu, industry experts say it remains unclear just how the disease may affect the nation's milk supply or pricing. As of October 9, the nation's largest milk-producing state had reported 93 H5N1 outbreaks in dairy herds, nearly doubling in the span of a week. There have also been 3 confirmed and 2 presumptive cases of human infection. All 5 cases were among Central Valley dairy workers who had no known connection. State and federal health authorities insist that H5N1 poses little threat to humans and that it is safe to drink milk that has been pasteurized because the process kills the virus. And of note, this is only occurring in California as we speak. But gee, Justin, I find it quite concerning that the cases have doubled up to 93 in just the short period of 1 week. So what do you think about that? Back to you in the studio.
All right, thanks, Captain. And I guess I'm not quite sure which direction to go in answering that particular question, because I could sure go down a conspiracy road in theory on some stuff, but that's not really founded in any hardcore evidence. So I'll stay away from that, other than I think it's alarming too. I would agree with you in the fact that it's alarming to see that happening, that increase. Are we seeing an outbreak there? And as we continue to see that, will it eventually, or will it have some effects in our marketplace? Now, I realize it's on dairies, but at the same time, just in general, the perception of agriculture and what that plays in that. And like the captain said, it was episode 166 back in May of this year when I interviewed Dr. Fred Gingrich with the American Association of Bovine Practitioners about bird flu and just what if, kind of posing some questions out there in regards to that. And the topic also came up a few weeks ago. It was episode 180 where I got the views on mandatory animal identification, one view from NCBA, one view from the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, and we did talk about bird flu, animal disease, and some of the things that go along with that discussion as well. So a couple other podcasts that you can go back and listen to that you might find useful as well. Well, as we turn now and take a look at our long-term weather, joining us is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, the change is here with weather and to the relief of a lot of folks.
Yeah, finally. I mean, we have some parts of the nation, especially the central and the west, that have gone 30 to 40 days with not even a trace of precipitation. Now, you go that long, that's pretty remarkable. So the change is being welcomed, even though the change is usually not to the people's liking. It changed to 30, 40 degrees colder and snow and rain and certainly a big change in pace, but it was really desperately needed.
Well, and I looked last week before we started seeing that weather moving from west to east across the Rocky Mountain range where we see a lot of the wildfires. And we had, I believe it was just in the United States, 28 wildfires still going. And of course, a couple big ones in Wyoming, some big ones in Idaho as well. And I mean, it's going to totally change when we look at that map this week. It's going to totally change what that looks like in terms of containment.
Yeah, this is the beginning of the end of the fire season. I don't want to say it's over, but this change in the weather is certainly going to help, because what this is, it's the first salvo, so to speak, of an overall bigger weather pattern change across really all of the northern hemisphere. The reason for the persistent warmth and dryness is the same reason why it was very favorable for the southeastern United States to be visited by two hurricanes. But now that pattern is changing, what we're likely going to see is the beginning of the end of the hurricane season and the beginning of the end of the wildfire season in the West. So this is a pattern that we've been in for the last month that has not been good. Yeah. Really, there's been really nothing good about it.
And as we were talking before we went on air, it was about 30 days where a good portion of the country, minus the southeast, of course, they experienced the hurricane, so that was a whole different type of weather that they were dealing with. But this dry, such a huge portion of the country. So as you see this pattern change and starting to get into something that's going to bring about cooler temperatures, some moisture with that, just kind of explain where you see that heading in the next 10 to 15 days.
What we're going to see for the last, let's say the last 10 days of October and into the first 2 weeks of November is a reconfiguration of the jet stream to where the door to the higher latitudes will be open. And that, you know what the higher latitudes is code word for? No. Canada.
Oh, okay. There you go.
So yeah, we just like to throw out fancy terms. What that means is a lot of the really cold air that's been building high up in the higher latitudes of Canada, the North Slope of Alaska, then, really more importantly, over into Siberia. While it's been warm here in the U.S. and dry, keep in mind the cold air has been building in those areas. And so what's going to start to happen is we're going to start to accessing those colder air masses, and they're going to spill into Canada and the U.S. And so we may see, just it's like putting a car in reverse. Instead of this warm, dry pattern, we're likely going to trend to a much colder one. Now, it may not get cold and stay cold permanently, but we're going to start to see waves where the air is going to be colder, and these fronts will be able to start producing more in the way of precipitation. So the really warm second half of September, the really warm first half of October may end up being a pretty cold late October and a pretty cold November. With that, and I know this is, you can't be totally exact, but is there areas where you see a little bit more precipitation than others, or what are you anticipating with that? Well, with the cold, you're going to get some precipitation. Now, is it going to be excessive and really heavy? Is it going to be able to reverse a lot of people's fortunes? Probably not. But what you will see is the the snowpack starting to build in the Pacific Northwest and the Central and Northern Rockies. And then you're also going to see more frequent opportunities for frontal system to produce, let's call it light to moderate precipitation events, but they're going to be more frequent. So you may not get that one big storm, but you're going to get several smaller to medium-sized ones that over let's say a 3 to 6 week period will certainly help out the dry areas.
Well, and definitely the dry areas across the country. I mean, of course, where I'm at here in Wyoming, we are actually at a pretty dry area. Then you start looking down into, Arizona, New Mexico, and that country, they're dry as well.
Well, yeah, the desert Southwest, once the monsoon stopped, so did the precipitation. And since the Pacific has been directing its storms very far to our north, they haven't had a chance for that. So we'll see their fortunes change a little bit further on down the road as well.
Another state I just want to point out, not to pinpoint specific states, but another one that's awful dry too is northern Texas and Oklahoma. What are they going to see?
Well, the good news is this recent change is bringing those areas some rain. New Mexico, southeastern Colorado, parts of southwest Kansas, and not all of the Texas Panhandle, but the northern and western parts of it and the Oklahoma Panhandle are going to get some good rain. Mm-hmm. So there are some opportunities for those areas here in the short term. All
right. Well, Don, appreciate the update. And like you said, the nice weather is a good and a bad. The good part is it's nice. The bad part is there was no moisture in it. And I think we're all needing the moisture. So appreciate the update. It kind of gives us an idea of what we're looking for.
Sure thing. I get the request all the time to have it rain at night, not during the day, and have temperature always at 75.
Yes.
As soon as I can figure that out, I'll let you know.
And then if you're going to go ahead and turn the wind on, turn that on when the rain is there.
Okay.
Because we just don't want any more wind during the day. So.
Exactly.
All right, Don, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. And you can tune in each and every morning to Don Day's weather forecast. You can go to his website at dayweather.com. You can find a link to his YouTube channel. Also, if you're looking for weather instruments, maybe it's rain gauges, digital stations, things like that, you can check it out on his website. Stay with us. After the break, I'll tell you what we're going to be talking about on next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Are you tired of putting the wear and tear on your ranch pickup or your good side-by-side out checking stock tanks or reservoirs? Or maybe it's just keeping an eye on a remote ranch location. When you stop and you think about it and you start to calculate the cost of your time, fuel, and miles on your vehicles, you're going to scare yourself. But there really is a very simple and a reassuring solution, and it's called Barn Owl. Barn Owl off-grid cameras and smart alerts provide you that assurance, and there's no question it is a time and a money saver. From anywhere at any time, no Wi-Fi or power needed. Build your off-grid camera system today at barnowl.tech. Real-time awareness starts here. Always know with Barn Owl. Well, if you're like me, when it comes to making purchases of large-scale items, meaning items that cost a lot, you like to do your research and know what you're getting into and what you should be looking for. And several years ago, we purchased a skid steer and never have regretted it. Absolutely one piece of equipment that is absolutely and extremely useful on a ranch operation. And if you will turn to page 70 in the latest issue, the September-October issue of Working Ranch Magazine, a great article there by James Beckham as he gives us the lowdown on mid-range skid steer loaders. So if you're looking at purchasing one or maybe getting another one or a different one, I'd encourage you to take a look at that article in the latest issue of Working Ranch Magazine. By the way, if you don't have a subscription, you can go to the website at workingranchmag.com. Well, coming up on next week's edition of the program, in fact, we were supposed to do it this week, but we had to put it off a week. We're going to be looking at Johne's disease. Now, you might have heard about it, maybe not totally familiar with it, but it's very contagious and it's fatal, and there's no medicine for it either. So that's coming up on next week's show. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. Now, if you'd like to get a hold of me, you can simply do it by sending me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. By the way, do us a favor, leave us a comment or a rating on this week's show or any shows you listen to. We'd appreciate that. I'm your host, Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.